Welcome back to Blue Sense Podcast. Nathan, thanks so much for joining me. It has been a little while. We have been very busy at Blue Sense to start 2026. It's been a great start to the year across a lot of new faces, both in brands, both in teammates, that kind of thing, keeping us busy, but excited to sit down and talk more about some of that work that we've been doing and really expand on a conversation I think we had very briefly at the tail end of the last episode around how our agency model has evolved, why we've taken that process or that framework quite deliberately speaking, and getting into more so the commercials of how that works, because it is something that we get asked about a lot, more on my end of the business, certainly. And so a lot of this has come about of 18 months ago or so, we made the decision to switch off the pretty traditional sort of percentage of spend, agency commission, whatever phrasing you want to give it, there's a few out there, pricing model, to a fixed fee structure that is really tightly geared around the various service delivery that we have for a given client and the work that goes into that. Maybe the best place to start is if you just talk through the decision making for you and said in doing that and what that evolved into.
Yeah, for sure. When you build percentage of ad spend, someone always loses and someone always wins. And that's like the fundamental issue with the model is that either the agency is being underpaid for the work being delivered, or the agency is being substantially overpaid for the work being delivered. And you're rarely priced correctly against the labor resource and value that's going into the account. And so that's where the issue kind of arises, is that you end up in a position if spend scales very quickly that suddenly you're paying an agency a very high amount and it's getting to the point in which, like, why don't you just move somewhere else? Is that value substantiated at that price? Particularly when you were anchored at a price that was considerably lower previously. And then what does the labor profile look like as spend scales? And I actually, although spend is a good proxy for labor requirements on not only paid media, but pretty much like everything associated with it, creative, whatever it might be, it's a pretty good proxy. It's just, I think there are more important levers that actually fundamentally change the labor profile. Some examples are markets. So if
Yeah.
you're selling an AU plus US on two separate Shopify stores, different ad accounts, the workload requirements there almost doubles, probably goes up about 70%. There's a little bit of
Mhm.
like scales of economy of scale, sorry, but majority like workload does go up a lot. There's channels as well. So you go and introduce TikTok or you go and introduce Pinterest when there's an entire another channel that needs to be individually managed on an ongoing basis, a very large increase in resourcing required. But if you just take ad spend on Facebook from 30K to 40K or from 30K to 50K, there normally isn't a doubling in the resourcing required, but the fee will double on most traditional percentage models or percentage plus base models. So that's kind of the issue with it. We prefer to just price against the cost of serving that account. I think it makes a lot more sense. And then on a 6 to 12 month engagement period, we can obviously reassess how the account has evolved over time. I think it's just a better, more honest model where both parties are winning because it's priced correctly and it's not someone's constantly losing, someone's constantly winning, depending on the dynamic of where we are in the year, as well as depending on the dynamic of where ad spend's getting pushed.
The idea there around how you're then looking at that economies of scale issue. So the old narrative of economies of scale was always that, like, when you go into a new market, it is more efficient with an agency to do that theoretically because we're already in the accounts, we're already across the strategy, the creative, the ad spend, etc. The point you make about, is it a single Shopify store using markets deployed in multiple countries? Is it a single ad account, multiple ad accounts, that kind of thing? That does make a very real material difference to the amount of work involved. And usually the actual efficiency gain is really just on the administrative layer, that sort of communication layer between client and agency team. And unfortunately, in terms of like a cost saving, that is becoming, I think, the layer that is going to be saved for most clients, even if you're just in a singular market, because of how quickly now I can sit down on a Saturday night and vibe code a new Slack app that's going to pull in a whole bunch of admin data and synthesize something that's trained on all of our content really quickly. That admin layer is getting faster and faster and faster. And like the speed of delivery in that particular tech market in the last 3 months is crazy. We really have no idea what it will look like in 6 or 12 months' time. Um, I think that's where we're going to find it's going to compress even further to this idea of what is the actual value being, like, what's the actual hands-on tools work being delivered. And so you might find actually that economies of scale goes away a little bit because it's more just actual on the tools work.
Yeah, I agree. Like the economies of scale is only in the admin, and as the admin compresses, it's like you're just paying for strategy, and the strategy changes across markets quite substantially. And if you want to see success in individual markets, you should treat them differently. Like I think everyone knows that, which is that if you just bucket
Mm.
AU and US and you just say we're just selling to both markets and we're not going to split them out, you're going to see worse results because you're not focusing on each
Mhm.
market in isolation.
So then we've talked a bit about the percentage of spend model. The other one that I have a lot of experience with on both sides of the table as a competitor agency and as an agency pushing it myself. So I come from a background in much larger agencies than Blue Sense in the past. The performance guarantee, where does that factor in? Because I can talk about this all day from both sides of the coin, but I'm curious what Nathan, the boutique agency founder, thinks about it.
I don't like it. We used to run performance guarantees for like I think our first 20 clients were off performance guarantees because
Okay,
I think it's the only way that you
you
can
need it.
get clients when you have no
Yeah,
credibility, right?
yeah.
Um, so what's the issue? Like, why don't we do performance guarantees? Because it misaligns to short-term objectives over long-term.
Hmm.
Number one, and number two is that you can rarely create a performance guarantee that is fair and can't be gamed.
Yeah.
Um, and if it is fair, no one like it's very rarely it will get employed. But like we can break down both of those. So what do I mean by you can always game a guarantee? Well, an example is that we lost a deal I think it was like 4 months ago when we were in Cape Town together as a team. And we lost a deal because the other agency put a guarantee in place that they
Hmm.
would be able to drop CPA attributed in platform by 30% over the first 3 months.
Hmm.
Um, at the same time, that brand said to us specifically, hey, our conversion windows to purchase are 150 days. And so if it takes 150 days for someone to buy from you, and let's assume they're correct because that's at least their truth of what they believe
Yeah.
reality is. And then the agency's guaranteeing that they'll drop your cost per acquisition by X amount in a short period. How is that even possible if new top of funnel audiences take 4 months to buy from you? Like it doesn't make logical sense. It's not congruent. And so how do they achieve that CPA drop? It's pretty easy. They just either change attribution models so CPA looks better in the platform. They heavily weight more spend towards bottom of funnel. So in the short term, it looks better because you are capitalizing on more conversions,
Hmm.
but you're draining the top of funnel and filling it up. And so you're
Hmm.
effectively just slowly dwindling new customer acquisition by taking the entire pipeline and converting it. Um, or there's other tricks that you could play as well. You could just drop spend by 20% and CPA will naturally come down, particularly if
Hmm.
there's a large organic presence or other channels that's driving new customers. And so, is any of those options in the best interest of the business? Probably not. Like
Mm.
the best interest of this business, they were already at a CAC, which was fine. Like the LTGP to
Yeah.
CAC on first purchase was like a 2.53. And it was like, this is more than fine to actually crank spend and scale.
Hmm.
But you'd be much better off being fine with the current acquisition cost and actually spending more.
Just doing a lot
But
more volume. Yeah.
yeah, but the agency didn't guarantee that because that's a lot harder to guarantee. Like they didn't have the confidence that they could refund their entire retainer based on growth. It was like, no,
Mm.
we'll bank on an efficiency number because we can definitely hit an efficiency number. So that's where like performance guarantees don't align to long term incentives of the brand. I think the other thing is that, and this kind of ties into why forecasting is dangerous in the pre engagement period,
Mm.
which is that if you ever ask an agency, like, okay, you've done this audit, here's all the things that you would do differently, here's how you would improve, here's your ways of working. Now, what commercial uplift do you expect within the business? I think it's a reasonable line of thinking as a business owner or a marketing manager to be like, hey, if I'm going to present this new agency to the board, I probably need to also present what the commercial implications are going to be. Like, we're going to do an extra million, 2 million, 10 million, whatever it might be. The issue with that is that if you ever get that number in the pre engagement period, It is made up. And
Yeah.
the error bars on it are huge because to do proper forecasting, it takes like at least 10 hours. And we know that because we do it for all clients that onboard. We take typically 30 to 60 days from onboarding to put the forecast together because it is so resource intensive to do. And we have a quantitative model and then we have a qualitative layer that goes on the top. And then we make adjustments based on context of the last few years. And so to put an actual forecast together of a likely outcome of the next financial year during a pre-engagement
Yeah.
period,
Yeah.
we have to bill for it. If
Yeah.
anyone wants that without us actually them being a client, we're going to bill it like a substantial amount because it's a substantial amount of work. And so when you go and ask them what's the commercial results of these changes, just know that the number that you're getting thrown is just a guess based on very little data. And if you are doing an RFP or if there are multiple different agencies that you're talking to and the agencies are aware that they're competing against others, well, now it's just a game of who can throw the biggest number forward.
Yeah.
And it's like
100%.
that isn't a good way to judge how good an agency is based on who can make up the biggest number based on upside. Like it's a crazy
Yeah.
way.
I mean, to quickly go back and to play the folly or the devil's advocate that's going to get shot down. So I wrote hundreds of those performance type contracts in a past role in my career. And you really they fall into two camps. You have very small businesses that would not be we frankly, we don't have the tooling, the capacity, and we are not a good fit to help scale those businesses. They are still dealing with significant product market fit challenges. And there's one school of thought that they need an agency that can come in and help them provide a skill. And the performance guarantee is frankly just a comfort blanket. But it is very much a very simply defined KPI or narrative that is, here is a baseline expectation of performance that we think we should be able to comfortably hit. And spoiler alert, the agencies should be able to really comfortably hit that, or commercially they would not be offering that dozens of times a month. But what is the actual material impact of that benefit on the bottom line for that small business? Total crapshoot. Like, we need to be like, if I'm looking back on that, it's literally gambling. It's a lottery ticket, like, as to whether it's going to work. My experience is more so in the enterprise market, where you're spending sometimes a couple of weeks going back and forth on clauses, tricks, whatever. The extreme end, like 6 months. I'm thinking of one example of, this was with a Fortune 100 company, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth on this contract, looking at, is it a traffic commitment? Is it a traffic with a revenue commitment? Is it a traffic, but we have to hold a certain share of brand versus non-brand? Is it a traffic with a certain conversion rate uptake? And all of these bounds that then are going back through a lawyer and whatever else. And you're sitting here going, one, the agency hasn't been paid during that engagement period because that's just commercial negotiation. Meanwhile, they were paying me quite well during that period to go through that negotiation. So the agency very much has costs through that period. And then two, what's the opportunity cost of just getting and like start trying some of those things and seeing, like, measure the commercial impact over the first 90 days. And are these strategies actually starting to work? So that you start to see that lift, because there is a way theoretically to solve for all of those sort of edge cases that you talk about, right? We can put protections in place around how you change the funnel strategy or the attribution window. But I think where I've really sort of seen the light as an aggressive term, but like come around to like, actually we can grow our business much faster and we can grow the client's business faster if there is a baseline level of trust in that negotiation. I think that trust is hard to establish, and it comes through in things like our YouTube content and market credibility that is hard to establish. Yeah, there's something there that is just like, if the agency doesn't feel trustworthy and you feel like you need that guarantee, it's probably not the right model. And I think it's something that we think about really critically internally at Blue Sense is like, if the client really needs that, they're probably not the sort of client we want our team working with long term, because just the harmony of that working relationship is not going to be as fruitful and as positive as some of, you look at our current 8 and 9 figure portfolio and the consistency with which they're able to deliver case study results. In large part, frankly, it's down to how well the client works with our team. Say what you want about our methods, our processes, all of that, the proprietary stuff that is really good. In large part, it's because clients are really receptive and leaning in and working really hard with us, I think.
For sure. And you can loop that back to the example before, that deal that we lost when we were in Cape Town. That was a multi 8-figure business, and we could have countered with a guarantee, but we didn't because honestly, like onboarding a client that needs performance guarantees, it's a bad culture fit because they don't trust us. And so we're onboarding someone post pre-engagement period and sales cycle, and they still don't trust us. And if you don't trust us at the point of kickoff, like this isn't going to be a good relationship, because there needs to be a degree of trust from you and from us for this to work. Like we don't need to work with you. We'll just work with someone else who does trust us. Like it'll be
I mean,
fine.
look, there's a certain benefit that we're very fortunate to have, or I'll say as a head of growth, I'm very fortunate to have. We have a surplus of demand right now through the market credibility that we've gained through your content, through other brands that are willing to say wonderful things about us, which is great. And I think there's a confidence that is able to come with that, where we can say, we can say, I was speaking to a brand last night, said, look, unfortunately, we're not highly confident that our services would deliver really high ROI for you right now. Here's 3 things I think you should work on for the next 3 to 6 months, and let's regroup and see if you're in a better position. And we'd love to have another chat. And you get these like, oh my God, I'm so grateful for your transparency, what have you. But it's just like, yeah, there is a certain amount of, like, the agency model is a product of the hard work at the expertise level that builds that demand, that builds that credibility, that then means we now have this position we can hold where we can say quite confidently, no, this is the model. This is where we're really confident we'll be able to deliver consistently for you. And if that's not a fit for you right now, that's okay. We're not, we're not going to
Yeah.
freak out about it. Yeah. What do you think is the starting point then for, so we ask for a lot of information up front when we audit a brand. And occasionally I'll get a brand, they're like, you want to know all of this detailed, like economic information about my business when we're on the first call. And I can show them an example of our model and why we go through that. And often they're like, wow, this is really transparent. That's great. And they'll share all of that. But I think that's sort of that starting point of like, how do we really tightly align those shared incentives so that then the fee structure, the commercial model, whatever, it's almost just a byproduct because we are so aligned around contribution margin, acquisition MER, whatever the particular metric that we're really going to be focused on. Where do you think that goes wrong, I guess, on a commercial model in terms of that alignment?
I think there needs to be owned transparency on the actual commercial impact that the agency can make in the context of the business. And I think there needs to be alignment on finance grade metrics that actually matter. So I think it's a combination of the two, which is like, let's not KPI on a ROAS number in Google, because all
Mm-hmm.
of that can be gamed. And let's move to something that has better data integrity and truth, which is financially led metrics, whether that's profit contribution, whether that's acquisition MER, whether that's LTGP to CAC, whatever it might be. Moving up the chain to a more reliable
Mm-hmm.
figure is a good start. And then we kind of talk about transparency, which is that there's this large influencer led brand that we're going to start working with. And it would be unfair of me to say that we should grade our work based on MER for them, because I
Mm.
would argue that 80% of their revenue comes from their Instagram and organic. And so at
80%
that,
might be underselling it.
yeah, like the ads might be doing nothing. And
Yeah.
so in that case, you go, like a typical agency will come in and go, yep, let's grade on MER, let's grade on profit contribution. These things are
Mm.
great. They'll spend 100, 200 grand a month. Everything looks amazing. But I think we need this level of transparency of like 20% of this revenue is actually coming from ads. And so we need to
Mm.
run some kind of incrementality testing. We need to get better KPIs to understand the causal relationship between spend and revenue realized on the store so that we can move towards a more truthful outcome. Because you also put yourself in a bad position. Anytime you aren't operating through truth of what is actually occurring, you will hurt yourself in the long term. That's just how it will work. So, like, we in the short term can claim profit contribution on this business, but on a long enough time horizon, the founder of that business will go, "Hey, I want to double." And we will go, "Okay, well, you're at a 10x MER, so we'll just double spend and the business will double." And we double spend and revenue moves up by 4%.
Mhm.
And then because it's
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
this whole time we were operating on a truth which was wrong.
Yeah.
And so the second that gets exposed, and it will always get exposed eventually in some way, you're cooked. So it's like, why don't from the very beginning we figure out what the truth is? Like, what is baseline
Mm.
reality as it currently stands? And then completely align on that before we even start the partnership. And then we can move
Mhm.
forward measuring against what is actually occurring. But it's where I think most agencies will come in and they'll measure against stuff that just doesn't matter, or they'll measure
Mm.
against stuff that has nothing to do with them. And then eventually they're cooked because of it. I got another example of a multi-$100 million business that we work with where they churned their old agency because the old agency was reporting to them on MER. And they
Mm.
kept telling, they were like, "Guys, paid ads is 10% of our marketing budget. 90% of our marketing budget goes to other stuff, which is driving most of our revenue. Stop claiming MER. Claim your attributed numbers in platform. Claim something. Figure it out. Give us a KPI that's real.
Yeah.
Stop claiming all of our revenue. You're not driving $200 million in rev." And then what did they do? They just kept coming back to them in the whips, and they were like, "Yeah, so the MER is 50." And they're like, "No, it's not. It's not 50. Stop claiming it." And then after like 2 months, they were sick of it, and they were like, "No, we're done. Like this. Stop claiming our revenue. This isn't what's actually occurring." And because they just couldn't reorientate towards truth, or maybe they didn't have the skill set to be able to like look at incrementality testing and actually start to draw causal inference of spend, they lost the client because they weren't operating on a KPI that actually made sense.
Yeah. I think so. There's an interesting learning there because it's like, okay, you're a $200 million brand. You have access to whatever you want from a measurement layer, right? And it's really more of a, like, you need to work with a really intelligent operator that is going to help you define and build that measurement layer that gives you a really clear picture of whatever that truth is. It's still obviously going to be the reality of modern media, is it's going to be some form of abstraction, but it is one that's grounded enough that we can then correlate it to our financial outcomes and make good decisions accordingly. I think almost a more interesting conversation, because it's in many ways it's more difficult, is that $5 to $20 million brand that is, I was having a conversation with this marketing event that Aaron Luxmore, good friend of ours at Lexa, puts on a couple of times a year with like all the tech partners. And always a great time. Love Aaron. And talking to someone there about this brand with a media budget somewhere in the like 50 to 100K a month kind of range, like a small brand, but someone that has clearly had some scale and they're now spending a lot of money on paid media. And he's talking about media mix modeling for this brand. And I was just like, what is the upside on the amount of money that you need to spend to deploy a system like that for a smaller brand, for a single digit percentage gain in efficiency on frankly what's still kind of a small media budget? And where's that sweet spot between, okay, the $200 million brand has to be doing that because there are so many other factors that are influencing their media mix and their efficiency. But like, there's a very real conversation that needs to be had of like, I feel like we sort of run into agencies in two ways, right? There is the more mass market agency below us that will offer the performance guarantee. It's a very linear sort of strategy that's very similar. There's then the agency that's sort of next to us or positioning themselves in that premium market that will come in and go, look at all these incredible tools and we're going to deliver every single one. And that's why you need to pay us 25 grand a month. And it's like, actually, where's the sensibility? Where's the rationality of sitting down and going through, this is the one or two tools that make sense for the scale that you're currently at today?
Yeah. People
It's
just want
hard.
to
Like,
bill.
where do you, Like, is there a sweet spot for an Australian client in your mind where bringing in something like incrementality tooling makes sense? I think that's come down a lot for us recently in deploying our own tools. And so there's a very real difference in cost of deployment. But like, is there a data driven layer that says, you know, if you're a $5 million brand, if you're an $8 million brand, we need to be more realistic about what that tooling can deliver for you versus $20 million brand?
Yeah. Well, I actually have a video on this. I think it's called like 99%, how to beat 99% of marketers or something. It's like how to
Mm,
become top percent on Meta. It's a good video. You should go watch it on the Blue Sense channel. One thing that I say in that is I break down measurement at different stages based on 7-figure,
mm,
8-figure, 9 brands. And yeah, you don't need incrementality tooling or marketing mix modeling at sub 10 mil.
mm,
And the reason being is that your channel complexity is very simple. You probably only have 1 or 2 primary channels. And
mm-hmm,
so like the causal impact of spend increases should be absolutely obvious.
yeah,
Once you start to bridge above 10 mil, then normally in the Australian market, there'll be an introduction of another channel sometimes. And
yeah,
because of that, some kind of incrementality testing becomes helpful. And so, and then once you've crossed the 9 figures, like you need even better measurement. And so it's a product of how much revenue you're doing and the complexity of where that revenue is coming from as well.
yeah. All right. All of that to wrap up. What a, if you were to look at, say, an early stage brand, you know, someone that's, so we don't bring on any brand that's doing sub $5 million now. If you were to look at, let's take that bucket, the sub $5 million brand that's maybe looking at what do we do next, the 5 to $15 million brand, which is really our sort of, call it mid-market tier. And then you've got the 15 to 9-figure, and then you've got the enterprise tier, the 9-figure guys. What are the key things that they should be doing to vet that model against the complexity that they have in their business if they're looking at an agency next week?
I'd be keen to hear your thoughts as well, but 0 to 5, I would honestly consider not even hiring an agency. The reason being is that you won't be able to vet who's actually good until you know the basics. And so what's actually really elite for us, it's actually one of the best things I think in the Australian market for us, is that there are very big coaching groups for the 0 to 5
Mm,
mil revenue range. And they train people very effectively on how to run their own Facebook ads and how to track P&L level metrics,
mm,
etc. And so then what ends up happening is once they cross the barrier of 5 mil, they watch our content and then they can actually comprehend and understand what we're talking about. And then they can also appreciate that we're actually good. If you don't know anything about ad accounts, it's actually pretty hard to distinguish like watching our content and then like a bad agency and going to a bad agency and trying to discern who's who, because
mm,
we'll give you a bunch of good ideas, I would hope. And then the bad agency will give you a bunch of bad ideas, but you won't be able to differentiate. And they'll also throw in a performance guarantee and they'll be cheaper. And you're like,
yeah,
oh, let's go there.
yeah,
So if you're in a small revenue bracket, learn it yourself. As you go into like mid market, 5 to 15, I think that if I was going to bet an agency, it's going to come down to there's so many different directions we could go here because I'd look at so many things. So I'm trying to prioritize the most important stuff. Number one is I would look at how they are KPIing performance and whether you're aligned with the way that they see performance. And that also kind of extends to their worldview on paid media. Like, what is their
mhm,
opinion on what paid media should be doing? What is their opinion on where it sits within the larger business model? Do they think that paid media is like all that matters? Or are there other things? I think the next is actually, and this might be biased as an agency owner, but I think it is the way that they see the business model of the agency. Because when you are fundamentally an agency is a recruiting and hiring business, sorry, a recruiting and training business at its core.
yeah, yeah,
And so how good an agency is, in fact, I would actually argue the revenue threshold of any business is the sum of the skill set within the people within that organization. And I think that is just effectively accentuated within the agency model because there's no cost of goods. All of that
mm,
capital is actually deployed into people instead. And so it becomes even more prevalent. And so I'd want a pretty good understanding if I was going to work with an agency, if I had an e-com brand or a retail business, I'd want to understand like how much time is going into training and hiring
Mm.
within the business. Where is the founder's time going? Because often the reason why, unfortunately, most agencies aren't good is because they hire very quickly to fill demand within the market. And because of that, there is no training in place. There is no strong recruiting funnel in place that's not allowing many people into the organization. And then as a function of that, you get sloppy work out the other side. Is there anything you would add?
I think, yeah, so the way I describe it to clients, I'm like, the only reason you hire an agency is because you have a business need for exposure to learning from a much more diverse array of scenarios than any one brand could possibly have on their own. And there's a couple of ways to solve for that. You could go and hire a very senior media buyer that has worked agency side, maybe in some great agencies, or has worked at a really great brand. You know, if you're a small brand and you could afford to go and hire someone that's worked internally at Muscle Nation for the last couple of years while they've been on this like incredible tear and spending an unbelievable amount of money on Meta really efficiently. Like, I think they're one of the great stories in Aussie ecom at the moment. Would that be amazing for your business? Absolutely. Could that small business afford that person? No, because we would pay them twice what that small business could afford to because of the value they could deliver in the ecosystem of a really good agency. And so then the principal vetting thing, I think, for that 5 to 15 million range, often the biggest question we'll get is like, show me case studies. And I can show you case studies from clients in that bracket. I can show you case studies from $200 million brands that we've done amazing things for. But there's so much context required to those scenarios, not just about the work that we've delivered, but the way that their team has responded to that work and the way those two teams have worked together, that I really think that the more important part is I completely agree. It's like, what is the training ecosystem? And so I can talk all day long, and like we do multiple training sessions a week internally. We have pod calls, share all of our video content internally first, and it's mandatory viewing for all of the team and that kind of thing. Usually the thing I just say, I'm just like, go and look at the YouTube and go and look at Nathan Perdier on Instagram and look at the amount of educational material that we're putting out publicly as sort of the tip of the spear relative to what we're exposed to internally. That is the learning, and that's ultimately what you're buying, is that exposure. And then I would say the thing you need to do to keep us accountable, or keep any agency accountable, is once you're on board, once you're hired, how often are you hearing about that? How often are you getting learning? When you get your daily or weekly update in Slack, in an update video, where's the anecdote of like, we saw this on another brand? What do you think? Do you think we could deploy a test like that? That's really the critical thing. And can they articulately speak to examples like that pre-engagement without it sounding like obvious bullshit? I think is probably the most important skill. And then I think once you get beyond that 15 million range, once you're a 20, 30, $50 million business, you're a real company now. You've probably got a board or some other decision-making structure in place. You're just a much more mature business that's going to make better decisions on average, more consistent. We still see some surprising ones, obviously, but like, it's going to be a lot easier at that level. I really think that the dangerous one is that 5 to 15, where it's like, I just go to like, what's the learning? Like, what's the value delivery of knowledge? That's the most important thing that you're ultimately paying for. The 5 million and below, I really think like you're bang on. Like I've moved from a worldview of before Blue Sense, like there's the odd agency out there. There's a freelancer that's pretty good. I still think freelance is a viable path, but I think like we see that many brands that have actually been pretty successful at the $2-3 million range with someone like an e-commerce equation. They do graduate out of that where they need more complexity, and that's where someone like a Blue Sense becomes really important. But there's value being delivered there for the small brand. It does become sort of homogenized once they get to that higher end of that bracket, and that's where we become effective. But there's two types of prospects that respond to us saying, sorry, we don't feel we can deliver value for you right now. There's the one that occasionally gets pretty offended and say, oh, you think you're too big for me, blah, blah, blah. And there's the ones that go, wow, thank you so much for all of the resources and things that we share, because we send them this big list. And if anyone would like to see that, please drop us a DM and I'll happily send it over to you. All of our free tools, calculators, some videos, like the specific videos that I would recommend you go and watch from our YouTube as sort of the foundational models of how we think about paid media and how to make better decisions. And if I was betting on the ones that I'm going to hear back from in 6 months' time, because they've hit that $5 million, $8 million, $10 million range, and they're keen to have a look at it, proper audit and work with us, it's always going to be the ones that are leaning in, and you go and see they've watched 10 hours of YouTube and something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Any final comments, or should we leave it there?
No, I think we can leave it there.
All righty. Appreciate your time, Nathan. See you on the next one.
Okay.